While millions of children around the world were excitedly waiting for the sound of reindeer bells and gifts under the Christmas tree in a house in a town ironically named Paradise, two young children were unknowingly preparing for the most horrifying Christmas celebration in history. They had no idea that just beyond their backyard, their mother lay cold inside a bag, while their beloved father had just washed the blood from his hands in time to take them to dinner with their grandparents. This is not a horror movie. This is the true story of what happened on Christmas Eve 2014 in Paradise, Pennsylvania, a case that would shock the nation and raise haunting questions about domestic violence, second chances, and the darkest corners of the human soul. If you want to follow more chilling true crime cases like this one, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. On the surface, the residents at 623 Georgetown Road in Paradise, Pennsylvania seemed like any other American home during the holiday season. Paradise, a small township in Lancaster County, was known for its peaceful rural character and close-knit community. The kind of place where neighbors knew each other's names and violent crime was virtually unheard of. In this seemingly tranquil setting lived Stephanie Kilhefner, a 34-year-old woman whose life revolved around her family and her deep love for animals. Those who knew Stephanie described her as a devoted mother to her two young children, a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old, whose names have been withheld to protect their privacy. She had a gentle spirit and a passion for caring for creatures great and small. Around their rented property, Stephanie kept horses, goats, and rescue dogs, creating a small sanctuary of sorts. Her days were filled with the routines of motherhood and animal care, finding joy in the simple pleasures of rural life. Living with Stephanie was her husband Dustin Klopp, a 36-year-old man whose past painted a far more troubled picture than the family facade suggested. To casual observers, they appeared to be a typical working-class family, navigating the challenges of raising young children. Some neighbors later recalled that Dustin seemed somewhat paranoid about privacy, particularly protective of their home and property in ways that struck them as doubtful, but not necessarily alarming. In small-town America, people tend to respect boundaries and give their neighbors the benefit of the doubt. No one suspected that behind closed doors, a pattern of violence had been building for years, waiting for the right trigger to explode into unspeakable horror. Christmas Eve 2014 began like any other day for the family. The children were likely excited about Santa's impending arrival, their young minds filled with the innocent magic of the season. But sometime during that December 24th, an argument erupted between Dustin and Stephanie. The exact cause of the dispute remains unclear from official records lost in the chaos of what followed. What started as a verbal confrontation rapidly escalated into physical violence. According to the subsequent investigation and Dustin's own later admissions to authorities, he struck Stephanie in the face with such force that she fell to the ground. But this was not where the violence ended. In what can only be described as a calculated act of brutality, Dustin retrieved a knife and slashed his wife's throat. Even this horrific injury was not sufficient for him. He then obtained an axe and delivered multiple blows to Stephanie's head, ensuring that she would not survive. The timeline of what happened next is particularly chilling in its methodical nature. While his two young children remained elsewhere in the house, completely unaware that their mother had just been murdered, Dustin set about disposing of the evidence. He placed Stephanie's body into a bag or duffel and dragged it outside to a shed in the backyard, concealing it from view. He then returned to the house and began the grim task of cleaning up the blood-spattered crime scene. The level of composure required to perform these actions speaks to a disturbing coldness. This was not a crime of sudden passion, followed by panic and remorse. This was calculated cover-up in progress. At approximately 10 o'clock that Christmas Eve night, after cleaning himself and changing into fresh clothes, Dustin loaded his two young children into the car and drove to his parents' home for a holiday dinner. For the next several hours, he participated in the Christmas celebration as if nothing had happened. He engaged in conversation, ate dinner, laughed, and played the role of the devoted father and son. His hands, the same hands that had just taken his wife's life. With a knife and an axe now held his children past dishes at the dinner table, and perhaps even helped them open presents. None of the family members present appear to have questioned Stephanie's absence in any serious way. Perhaps Dustin offered an excuse that she was ill or had other commitments. In the warm glow of Christmas lights and family togetherness, no one suspected they were sharing a meal with a murderer. The charade continued through Christmas Day. Dustin maintained his normal routines, caring for his children, perhaps even participating in the traditional opening of Christmas morning gifts. But as the day wore on, something changed. Whether it was guilt, fear of being discovered, or some other motivation, Dustin made the decision to confess. At 5:20 p.m. on December 25, 2014, he placed a call to the Pennsylvania State Police and admitted to killing his wife. He provided detailed information about where her body could be found in the shed behind their home. Officers responded immediately to the Georgetown Road residence and discovered exactly what Dustin had described. Stephanie's body was recovered from the outbuilding, and the scene inside the house showed evidence of the violent struggle and subsequent cleanup attempt. The subsequent autopsy and investigation revealed details even more disturbing than the initial crime scene suggested. The official autopsy report confirmed that Stephanie had died from the combination of injuries sustained during the attack. The knife wounds to her throat and the multiple blunt force trauma injuries to her head from the axe. However, the medical examiner also noted evidence that suggested possible sexual assault. Due to the condition of the body and the nature of the injuries, forensic pathologists could not definitively determine whether this assault occurred before or after Stephanie's death. This discovery added another layer of horror to an already heinous crime, suggesting that Dustin's violence toward his wife may have been even more depraved than initially understood. As investigators dug deeper into Dustin Klopp's background, a pattern of criminal behavior and violence emerged that painted a troubling picture. He had a criminal record dating back to 1997 with convictions for theft and assault. In 2001, he faced additional assault charges. His problems extended beyond violence to substance abuse. In 2009, Dustin was incarcerated for drug-related offenses involving stimulants, serving time until his release in 2011. But perhaps the most significant and tragic piece of his history involved Stephanie herself. In 2008, 6 years before her murder, Stephanie had taken the courageous step of obtaining a protection from abuse order against Dustin. Court records indicated that he had beaten her severely enough that she feared for her safety and sought legal intervention. For a brief moment, the system had provided her with protection. But then Stephanie made a decision that domestic violence advocates see all too often. She withdrew the protection order, likely believing that Dustin had changed, that he deserved another chance, or perhaps feeling pressure from family or financial circumstances to reconcile. It was a decision that would ultimately cost her her life. Following his arrest, Dustin Klopp was charged with criminal homicide in connection with Stephanie's death. He was held without bail at Lancaster County Prison awaiting trial. The evidence against him was overwhelming, not least of which was his own confession to police. The case appeared destined for trial, where prosecutors would have sought to hold him accountable for his actions and secure justice for Stephanie and her children. However, the case would never reach a courtroom verdict. In February 2015, just a few months after the murder, correctional officers conducting a routine check discovered Dustin unresponsive in his cell. He had fashioned a ligature and hanged himself. Prison staff immediately initiated emergency protocols, and he was transported to Lancaster General Hospital. Medical personnel were able to restore a heartbeat, but Dustin had been without oxygen for too long. He was declared brain dead with no possibility of recovery. For the next 2 days, Dustin's body was kept on life support, but not to preserve any hope of his recovery. Instead, this was done to honor organ donor status and facilitate the harvesting of viable organs for transplant. On February 7, 2015, Dustin Lee Klopp was officially pronounced dead at the age of 36. In a twist that many find deeply unsettling, various organs from the man who had brutally murdered his wife were transplanted into recipients who needed them to survive. Somewhere in America, people are living with hearts, kidneys, or livers that once belonged to a convicted domestic abuser and confessed killer. It raises profound ethical questions about the nature of organ donation redemption and whether a murderer's final act can partially atone for their crimes. The aftermath of this case brought another controversial element that continues to generate debate. At some point after both deaths, a decision was made regarding burial arrangements. A photograph of a grave marker circulated in media reports, showing that Dustin and Stephanie were buried together in the same plot. The headstone bears both of their names, the killer and the victim sharing their final resting place for eternity. For many observers, this arrangement seems incomprehensible and deeply wrong. Stephanie, who suffered years of abuse at Dustin's hands and ultimately died in terror and agony, now lies beside her murderer. Some have suggested that this arrangement may have been made by family members who were perhaps trying to keep the family together in death, or who could not afford separate plots, or who were following some unclear last wishes. Others argue that it represents a final violation of Stephanie's dignity and agency, denying her even the peace of being separated from her abuser in death. The real victims of this Christmas tragedy are, of course, Stephanie herself and her two young children. At ages 5 and 2, they lost their mother to violence and their father to suicide within a span of less than 3 months. One can only hope that they have been placed in a loving, stable environment where they can receive the counseling and support they will need to process this trauma and build meaningful lives despite the horror of their early childhood. This case stands as yet another reminder of the lethal dangers of domestic violence and the critical importance of taking threats seriously. Stephanie had recognized the danger Dustin posed back in 2008 and took action to protect herself. But like so many victims of intimate partner abuse, she made the decision to give him another chance to withdraw the protection that the legal system had provided. The statistics on domestic violence are sobering. According to the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, on average, nearly 20 people per minute are physically abused by an intimate partner in the United States. When a woman leaves or attempts to leave an abusive relationship, her risk of being killed increases by 75%. The most dangerous time for a victim is often when they have just left or are planning to leave. Stephanie's story tragically illustrates why protection orders and separations must be taken seriously and maintained even when the abuser appears to have reformed. The case also highlights systemic issues in how we handle domestic abusers within the criminal justice system. Dustin had multiple arrests and convictions for violence and drugs over nearly 2 decades. He had demonstrated repeatedly that he posed a danger to others. Yet he was free to continue his pattern of abuse, ultimately with fatal consequences. While no system can prevent every tragedy, this case raises questions about whether more could have been done, whether warning signs were missed, whether intervention programs might have made a difference. These are questions that communities across America continue to grapple with, as domestic violence remains a pervasive and often hidden epidemic. The organ donation aspect of this case continues to provoke debate about ethics and redemption. Some argue that allowing Dustin's organs to save lives represents a small measure of good emerging from evil, that innocent people who needed transplants should not be denied life-saving treatment because of the donor's crimes. Others find the idea deeply troubling, questioning whether murderers should be allowed to donate organs, whether recipients have a right to know the donor's history, and whether there is something fundamentally wrong about a killer's body parts living on in innocent people. There are no easy answers to these questions, and they touch on deep philosophical issues about the nature of identity, redemption, and justice. As we reflect on the events that unfolded in Paradise, Pennsylvania during that Christmas season of 20, we are confronted with the darkest aspects of human nature, the capacity for violence that can lurk within intimate relationships, the ease with which someone can commit unspeakable acts and then present a normal face to the world, and the ripple effects of violence that extend far beyond the immediate victim. Stephanie Kilhefner deserved better. She deserved a life free from fear and violence. She deserved to watch her children grow up. She deserved to experience many more Christmases surrounded by the love of her family and the animals she cared for so deeply. Instead, her life was stolen by the person who had vowed to love and protect her. This case reminds us that domestic violence does not discriminate based on geography, socioeconomic status, or the apparent normalcy of a family's outward appearance. It can happen anywhere, even in a town called Paradise. It reminds us to believe victims when they report abuse, to support their decisions to seek protection, and to maintain vigilance even after relationships end. It reminds us that second chances for abusers must be weighed carefully against the safety of their victims, and that patterns of violence rarely resolve themselves without serious intervention. Most importantly, it reminds us that behind every crime statistic is a real human being whose life mattered, whose loss leaves a permanent hole in the world, and whose story deserves to be told with honesty and respect. We invite you to share your thoughts on this case in the comments below. What are your views on victims who withdraw protection orders? How do you feel about the decision to bury Dustin and Stephanie together? Should violent criminals be allowed to donate their organs to save lives? These are complex questions with no simple answers, but thoughtful discussion can help us better understand these issues and perhaps prevent future tragedies. If this case has affected you, or if you want to learn more about other true crime cases that have shocked America, please subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Together we can raise awareness about domestic violence and honor the memories of victims like Stephanie Kilhefner by refusing to let their stories be forgotten.